I am good. We're good.
You meant to say IT director. We slipped and said daughter.
My
All right.
one of the filmmakers in my house is doing some editing.
So let's get everybody in now. We are recording, and we've done all the prerequisite work to enable everyone. That so we saw that same phenomenon popping up there. So I'm just going to check. Good. Okay. All right, I think we're in good shape, Heather.
Okay, so I am calling the meeting to order. This is the November 10th special meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force. I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:06 p.m. First thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes from October 27th, 2021. Do I have
I'll make that motion.
John Riley,
I'll second. Cheryl.
Cheryl? Any discussion? Seeing none, I will deem the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Did I do that right? Okay. Next item is discussion and possible action task force recommendations. Now, do we have let's see, we should do this the way we did this the last time. So I could share my screen and we can make a list, the recommendations, and then the proper place where they would go.
Heather?
Yeah.
Will this be a continuing list from our preliminary recommendations from the last time we did this?
Yes. Is that good with everyone? So I have to share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So as we know, we heard a preliminary report from Ed Advance. There is an additional report that is coming. Stephanie, is that correct?
That is correct. I met with Dr. Glass after the last DEI task force, and we discussed the task force request to do further analysis of the subgroups. And so we have engaged him in that work. He anticipated it could take 3 to 4 weeks. So I have tentatively booked him for the evening of December 1st. He thought that was the first reasonable Wednesday evening that he would be available with the completed analysis.
Okay. Will we need to add an agenda item here to add a meeting, or is that something that can happen at another date?
It would need to happen in another date. We because this is a special meeting, we're not allowed to add agenda items. Right.
Okay. Okay. So getting started, I will kick the ball off and say that I don't like sharing my screen. A recommendation that I have is that going forward in the future, Easton Reading Region 9 engages an outside source to do the climate survey and the analysis, and that deeper look at the climate survey data is presented to the boards of education and also to the climate committees as a matter of course, as practice. So I should have been writing that down. Devin?
I would recommend that we also revisit the calendar of meetings.
Okay.
We've
Hang
talked,
on a
I
second,
think, go ahead.
hang on. So this is another recommendation?
Yep.
Okay, so
Heather,
let's do
can I
them-
just,
let's do them one at a time, because then we have to also say who they go to, right?
Oh, yeah.
Heather, can I just suggest that maybe you flip the order when you said to engage the outside source to do an analysis and a presentation, that first go to the district climate committee and then go to the board after the climate committee.
What's the word I want? To do the climate survey, to conduct.
Well, let me just ask the question. Are you asking that we engage an outside consultant to help us construct future climate surveys and then also assist with the analysis of the survey data?
Yes, both. So basically what he was talking about, where there are existing, buckets that you can pull from, and you can also add your own questions in based on your school's need. And then, so it's the outside sources creating the survey, doing the analysis, and doing the presentation. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yes, I just think we had to be careful with the wording because the district is conducting, the district is administering the survey. We can certainly work with a consultant or use an outside organization to build the survey, right? To construct or build the survey. And then I hear you also asking for assistance for the analysis and presentation of results.
Yes. To create the climate survey, do the analysis. Subgroup, what's the word? Cross tabulation?
That's the word.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So going back before we even get to this point, with Ed Advance coming back to us with the cross tabulations, what have their instructions been in terms of which cross tabulations we need to be looking at? The reason that I ask is I just want to make sure that we're not going to come back a second round and find that either we weren't clear enough or we're missing a key group.
In my discussion with Dr. Glass, I shared the interest in having a subgroup breakdown by race. That's what I heard out of our conversation. And he suggested also adding gender. Now, depending on the results of that analysis, we may or may not be able to bring back that full analysis to any public meeting. Right. So but that's the analysis that he has been asked to do.
And sorry, that's a function of the number of people within the subgroup, correct? Because
Exactly.
at a certain point, it becomes identifiable.
Right. So if he's looking at it and we already have the information by school, the number could be so small that looking at the analysis of the responses could become identifiable.
Right.
One last question, identifiable to whom?
To anyone in the public. We need to be able to protect the safety and our students, the information that the students shared in the climate survey.
Okay, will this be, so as we're looking at the data, for example, I go back to even the DEI survey where, we had those numbers of the middle school respondents, the student respondents. One of the questions that came to mind when I saw that presentation was, out of that number, how many were from marginalized groups? And then what is that universe of unified groups, what is that universe of those groups? Because if you know, you may be looking at a total respondent of 30, but if you're looking at those, for example, from the African American community, if that universe is, you know, a much smaller group, those answers, even if you have like 5 or 8, that can be statistically significant to that universe versus the universe of all students. So the task of this committee was to really find out, as I understood it, what those experiences are to those in those marginalized groups. And so it is to be expected that they will be much smaller than the universe of all students. So I just want to make sure that we're not coming back and saying, well, we only had like maybe 10 African American students answer something, and that's not reflective of the universe. What is the universe of the African American students in our schools?
It's not about sort of marginalizing the response from marginalized communities. It's about protecting the identity of the respondents. And when we get into an identifiable situation, we can't have these conversations in public. Yeah. And because it would risk identifying those students. And that's, I think, what Stephanie is getting at, that if we get into these small subgroups, we can't have a public presentation about that, which is not to say that the local climate committees, the administration aren't taking those responses seriously also.
Right. But it's a fairly small number, right? Isn't it like 5?
Number of what, John?
The sort of minimum number, if you go below a certain number, isn't it? I thought it was 5.
So if there's a minimum number of 5 people that could be identifiable, is that what you're saying? Like,
Correct.
What is the minimum number?
Correct.
Okay.
So just to like my understanding, what he said is that he would be able to break it down to tell you exactly that ninth graders who identify as female and of indigenous descent feel this way. And if we have one person who is that, then we all know who is, then any, not just we, but anyone in the public would know how that student responded. And that's the kind of thing that you have to protect.
Yep.
But correct me if I'm wrong, won't they be able to bump that group out, the subgroup out, so that it's not one person, or that, so that it meets the threshold to make it unidentifiable?
So we don't know. It depends what we find. So that's what I'm saying. So we will have that very thorough analysis as a district. And I think we need to think very carefully, going back to what B said, which is absolutely true, that going back to the goals of the committee, we want to be able to respond to the quality of the statements that are being made by students, especially those students who are in potentially marginalized groups. So if we were to publish the respondents by counts in the different subgroups, then we wouldn't be able to share their responses because of the risk of it being identifiable. So instead, by looking at the responses kind of more generally and getting a gauge of the responses in more of an aggregate, if that's necessary, it still provides information about our students' experiences. And then the district can certainly take action with reference to the more specific subgroup information. Again, it really just goes back to protecting our students' identities.
So I just want to make sure I understand it, because you guys live in this day-to-day realm of privacy in academia and all of this. I do not. So for me, a person who went and encouraged people to speak their truths, what I want to make sure I understand is that we may not be able to report this here in the public meeting. What then is left for those people who did go, and who, if they fall below that threshold, what happens to the data that they have provided us?
So what we promised the respondents was that their information would be anonymous. And so we want to be responsive to the results of all respondents. And so where we see that potentially all students who fit into a particular category, so let's say females of a particular race made certain statements about their sense of comfort or safety, we can take action on that in the form of looking at supervision in certain areas, or looking at if there's a need to provide professional development. But this is actionable. It doesn't mean that we would release the specifics to the public.
So the internal team, I just want to make sure I clarify, Stephanie, what you're saying. It's not that the data isn't being looked at or used. It's that the data can only be reviewed by an internal team of people who, for FERPA reasons, are allowed to look at that data, identifiable data, but that's not available to the board. It's not available to the larger task force, members of the task force, or to the public because of FERPA rules. We're not allowed to look at identifiable information for students, but like the administration is, the DEI, the central offices, you guys are using that data internally to inform PD and other decisions.
Yes, that's correct. And that
Okay.
is really tied to the changes that we made this year as well, right? That we're meeting with much greater frequency as a full district team, and that the building climate committees are also meeting on a very regular basis. So when they're having those building climate committee meetings, they're not talking about the specifics necessarily of the responses, but they are talking about the school-based action plan, or the set of goals that they have related to the district theory of action.
So would this data be able to be broken down in the school level climate committees?
No, because the school level climate committees include parents and potentially students, but it can be broken down in the district climate committee.
We had, just for clarification, we had an issue like this regarding special education, that we could not share certain information about kids receiving certain services because there was maybe one kid receiving those services, and it would be putting that person's family at risk to share that level of information. But if it's, you're saying greater than 5, it can be. John doesn't know.
That is the number that sticks in my head, but I've looked at a lot of policy, so it could be another one. But
the number that the state uses as a threshold, whether they suppress the data or not, may not be what would be considered appropriate for making some of this information public. And that's why I'm not intentionally being vague here. It just really depends on what the analysis shows.
So
we kind of in the weeds here a bit, straying from the recommendations. Not that this isn't a really important conversation.
Not really, because we're discussing this first recommendation. Cheryl has her hand up.
Yeah, one clarifying question. So the district committee, Stephanie, when you define district committee, that was the district climate, that would be the administrators, right, who are authorized under FERPA to have access to that data.
That's correct. And
Okay.
those are really the only individuals. It would not be appropriate for a classroom teacher to have information about students not on that classroom's teacher's roster.
Yep, and just to clarify for everybody, FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's law. So like, as everybody said, we can't, even board members, we can't access that data. But anyway, the clarifying question for surveys. So the cross tabulation that we're having Dr. Glass doing, because the data was constructed separately, the climate survey is one group of surveys that doesn't have the demographics, if you will, to allow for the same cross tabulation as the DEI survey, which is arguably a much smaller sample. And I would be worried about, honestly, kids getting targeted if people find out who they are. But so I guess, how is Dr. Glass going to cross tabulate the two sets of data? Because it's two different groups of questions.
Yeah, thank you for the clarifying question, Cheryl. He's not looking at the DEI survey information. It is honestly too small of a data set to include in this analysis. He is looking at the student climate survey of 2021.
But
Which doesn't have demographic information, or has limited demographic information in it, correct? I mean,
It does not have as much demographic information, certainly, as the
Which
DEI.
demographic information does it have?
It has race, it has gender.
So the 2021 survey, climate survey, ask the students to identify their race and their gender.
I'm going to ask Darlene,
Yeah.
since she is probably most familiar with the questions that are on the survey.
I think from the demographic information, I think it does start with gender, grade, town, race are four of the earlier questions.
Because I
have the high school
I
one,
did get the ones that you sent, and there was nothing about race on there.
The information I sent was, I did not send the demographics. I just sent the responses to the other questions. Beatrix is on my committee.
Oh, got it. Yeah, for the high school,
But
just for clarity.
it had
purposes.
gender. I was very surprised to find that it had gender, but it didn't have race.
I will go back and double check.
The high school one has race. And the high school one also has gender, including it's male, female, transgender, non-binary, prefer not to respond. And then
Right.
race, white or Caucasian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Asian American, American Indian or Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, biracial or multiracial, do not know, prefer not to respond.
Jenny,
I think Susan was ahead of me and some others waiting.
she put her hand down. Yes, Susan.
Yeah, I put my
Oh,
hand
okay.
down.
Okay.
Cheryl answered the question I had. Thank you, though.
I do think we're way into the weeds and not necessarily on track with this question anymore, except for maybe the part about the subgroup cross tabulation. Maybe it could just be that portion of it could just be removed and talk about just the results being
No.
presented to the school climate surveys and the boards of education, like with the appropriate allowable, I don't know, maybe something more to do with what you're discussing in terms of student privacy or the information allowable to be presented to each of those groups.
Yeah, and also the survey will be different if the recommendation that we go with a nationally normed third party survey, the questions that we have in the current survey from last year will be different in the survey that would be administered in the current school year if this recommendation is taken up and we switch to a new survey. So we could make the recommendation that there's questions that allow the cross tabulation to occur by subgroups and that the data be presented as allowable by FERPA in the public as allowable by FERPA.
I think a part of this is this. It's not just that enough that it is done by a third party, because at the end of the day, that third party will present what we allow them to present and what we direct them to present. That's basic vendor management, right? So as you were saying, Devin, I think what we need to figure out is look at the questionnaire that we end up with and say, okay, these are the things that we're going to present. Those will be the published norms. And that way it eliminates a lot of these questions about why are some things being included and others aren't, and why, you guys live in this space, professionally. Those of us as parents and as involved citizens, we're not in this space. So when we see things that appear to be, for lack of a better word, consistent. When we see things that don't appear to be consistent, it raises questions. So to me, once we establish the questions for the surveys, I think there are certain things that we just need to be able to know. These things will be able to be broken out in a certain way. And I think that eliminates a lot of the questions that come up.
So I changed this to, you can read it on the screen, that says that the survey include greatest possible tabulation. We can say including, and the subgroups that we want included, and that the results be presented in the greatest possible subgroup cross tabulation, including race, gender identity, sexual orientation, be presented to the school climate committees. the boards of education, the one thing to remember is that the school climate survey had a large number of responses. And the DEI survey, those questions will be folded into the climate survey going forward, was my understanding, can be. And what's that?
Right. Not all. I think
not all of them.
Right, but some subset of questions that allow for one survey that will provide the district and the central office with actionable information to continue to improve school climate and our response to DEI concerns.
And I'm really trying not to get into the weeds with this, but the questions that are chosen for the climate survey, when that is done, will that be in consultation with the school level climate committees?
Yes, so typically the surveys are revised based on the responses and any patterns or themes that the climate committee sees in the responses from the previous year. So for instance, if they see that students are expressing discomfort in a particular area, they might choose to tease out that single question maybe into 3 questions so that they can measure whether they've made progress in that area. So at this point, we have not begun to discuss what information that we want to gather from our students next spring. That's, really a multi-month process. And again, I have asked for Dr. Glass to meet with our district climate committee, actually tomorrow, to have a conversation about other tools that we might use that would allow us to draw from a bank of nationally normed questions created by national climate organizations, right? So that we would be able to do some of the work that we discussed at our last meeting. But at this point, we can't say exactly what questions will be on the climate survey beyond those that are mandated by the state of Connecticut.
Can we establish that regardless of the questions, there needs to be standard crosstabs for the purpose, if we're moving the work of the DEI committee down to the climate studies, then that we should definitely establish that these crosstabs will exist in all climate surveys.
We can put that in this recommendation right here, where I've said, including race, gender identity, anything that you want to be put in here for those subgroups, that's bringing us back to the task at hand, which is writing these recommendations. So if there's something else that you would like in here, what is it?
So let me just, and again, I'm very ready to move on to the next item, but I do want to just clarify that part of what makes Dr. Glass's work, his analysis, the follow-up analysis, so time consuming is that he needs to look at, if a student said, I have not felt safe, or I don't feel comfortable in a particular environment on the basis of my X, and that is race or religion or political views or sexual orientation, whatever it might be, he then is going to look at the other responses of that individual to gather more information. So as you can imagine, that's a very time-consuming analysis that he will conduct, which is partly because this is a homegrown survey and it's not one that was pre-constructed with sort of all of the algorithm built in behind it that would enable that analysis to occur more easily.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
So I've written a recommendation. I think I understand what you're trying to do. And if you like, I can read that recommendation and put it in the chat so that if you like it, Heather, you can copy and paste it into your document that you're sharing. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, but I think the chat is not enabled.
Okay, I
It's
think I
enabled
can
for
send,
co-host, I think.
I can send a chat directly to you, Heather.
Okay.
She won't be able
Okay.
to copy and paste it. The copy and paste function won't work, and people shouldn't be using the chat just in general.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So my recommendation is something like this.
Wait, hold on. Is this what's in the chat?
Nope. There's
No.
not.
I was able to see a comment from Darlene in the chat.
Right.
And
And I'm telling people, please don't use the chat because we're not supposed to be sending messages in the chat.
Okay.
Right.
All
And,
right.
and copy and paste won't work anyways. So an email is fine.
Okay. So I'm looking at the kind of the language that you placed up here.
Mhm.
And I think something like this might work. Recommend that the district utilize a research-based climate survey and present these data to district and school climate committees and the DEI task force.
Can you
Survey
just,
data.
can you just do it slower so I can?
Let's let him read it through once,
Okay.
please, and then we'll figure out where.
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, so recommend that the district utilize a research-based climate survey and present these data to district and school climate committees and the DEI task force. Survey data will enable the school climate committees to identify norms, establish benchmarks, and address strengths and weaknesses. The presentation of the climate survey data should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis where possible.
Chris, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I think Dr. McKinnon's proposal more or less aligns with what was on my mind based on Devin and Stephanie's comments, which is if we're going to recommend something that is norm-based, I think we should go ahead and recommend something that is norm-based. I think that there was value in a homegrown approach, but I think there's substantial value in a norm-based approach. And the question is whether or not we go wholesale with a normed survey and also task the climate committees with saying, if there are a couple of things you want to follow up on, you can add those to the norm-based piece, but understand that they're not going to be normed against anything. But I think that Dr. McKinnon's recommendation is perfectly adequate for all of those.
Okay, Cheryl?
I agree with Chris. I think one caveat, and I'm really more saying this for purposes of the public, so people who do feel marginalized can feel reassured. As as appropriate or as applicable doesn't mean that people are going to be suppressed. It's mostly to protect individuals from, again, being targeted and being identified, and to the public where they may not be safe. So I just want to clarify that for purposes of the record and just to really reassure myself as well. I think that's what that's the intent.
A caveat to your caveat, Cheryl, is that if we went with a nationally normed survey and the instrument only called for, let's say, gender and age, I think we want to reserve the right and expectation that the instrument that is delivered would include additional subgroups that we can cross-tab, even if that's not based on a national, if that's in addition to what the instrument has.
Yep. Okay.
Well, that is my biggest question, because my understanding is that we are moving this work down to the climate committees. My understanding from what I see in the chat here from Darlene, in a year where we had an African-American superintendent, when we did this study, when we did the climate study, race was not asked, right? For this past study, because when the results I got didn't indicate race. So, to me, if we are moving the work of the diversity and inclusion committee down to the climate committees, there should be established norms of what we're going to be looking at. Otherwise, we run the risk of that getting lost in all of this.
It's not that there aren't things that we can look at. The problem is if there aren't enough respondents in that group, even at the school level, if anybody can identify that respondent, it is illegal for that
I
data to be
understand
shared
that.
because
And I get that. But what I'm asking for is, can we have as part of this and say, moving forward, the climate committees will be looking at this. These will be the crosstabs and include those marginalized communities, and with a caveat that at least says, if we don't have enough respondents, we won't be able to respond. If we don't have enough people responding, we won't be able to report this out. But it should be standard operating procedure moving forward that will be included.
I believe that's what I'm suggesting in here. That
Okay, just want to make sure I understood that.
But we could use Dr. McKinnon's proposed language and then also say that we want to make sure that the cross tabulation includes, and that's what I'm asking for, race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, anything else that we want to put on there.
I think just to be clear, when you say cross tabulation, what you mean is that you would ask questions on that, because tabulation implies how you're dealing with the data afterwards. But you would say, we're looking for a nationally normed instrument, and the instrument must or will be revised to include at least these sort of demographic subgroups.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So can I have that? Can I have that language? Is it, we can't share it in the chat?
I can certainly say that again. Let me clarify something that I think the motion should be broad and include something like subgroups, representative subgroups or subgroups, something like that, because we will need to come back to the board to, the board has to approve the survey tool. So I would think that the district, myself and Dr. Pearson, Hugo, we will go out and find a research tested instrument and bring that instrument back to you for you to approve the use of that instrument. Because whenever you approve an instrument, a survey that is given to students, you should have board approval. And just be careful about listing all the subgroups, because if you could actually narrow instead of being broad. Right now, we're going out and looking at a survey tool that represents subgroups. You don't want to leave something off just because you didn't put it in a motion. That, we will be coming back to you with the research tool and looking at and saying, this is a research-based climate tool survey. The validity and reliability of the survey is X. The sample size is Y. The survey addresses these subgroups. This is how we can create, these are the national norms and so on. This is how the survey works. So this isn't your one-shot deal, I guess, in identifying the survey. It just, you understand what I'm saying?
I think that there is concern, and the concern is justified, that race wasn't included this past year. And in the past, we've been presented with a number of 98% of kids are happy. And it was never broken down to say the 2% that said they were not happy at school were all part of this subgroup. So that's where this is coming from.
What if we say including but not limited to? So then you get it, we have to include XYZ, but it's not limited to those, so we don't accidentally limit our overall options.
I think we have a set of identified groups within the recent climate and sort of anti-bullying language that we approved.
Okay. Also, this is a recommendation that's being made. Is there any, so did I capture this correctly here? Recommend that the district utilize a research-based climate survey, that the survey include the greatest possible representative subgroups, including but not limited to race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, that a third party do the analysis of the climate survey, and that the results, including greatest possible subgroup cross tabulation, including but not limited to race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, be presented to the school climate committees, district climate committees, the task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the boards of education.
Heather, I would add immigration status.
Okay.
Can I suggest that Dr. McKinnon email you what he read so we can see that on the screen
Yeah.
too, and make sure that we're capturing the essence of that?
Yes.
I thought the recommendation was just to not list a lot of specific groups. And now I feel like we're
That's what I thought as well.
doing the reverse of that and adding more, that we're going to be getting rid of that list and making it more holistic.
I think it was, he was correctly warning against if we list all of these things out and there's somebody who's left out, then there's not a mandate or not even a mandate, but a recommendation to include that group as well. But by using the phrase including but not limited to, it prevents that from happening. If we don't list things out at all, then there is the suggestion that we are deliberately not wanting to include certain subgroups.
Could we say including but not limited to the groups identified in the positive school climate policy? And just leave it there because it's going to be much more succinct that way.
Or in the DEI statement, task force statement, we list, I think, every group
Right.
that's here and beyond. Or, I mean, to Dr. McKinnon's suggestion, I like the broad mandate, and we could do something like e.g., because it's not inclusive, right? For example, all of these things not limited to. And so that would cover all the bases, and I think hopefully split the difference here.
I would feel good about the idea of what was listed in the policy, because it's spelled out in the policy.
Yeah, and that's the most recent one we took, and also is consistent with the sort of state law, which helps to sync up there. But I share Beatrix's concern that last year I'm sure there were reasons behind it, but it seems concerning that we did not include race as a group.
Agreed. Okay, so here I recommend that the district utilize a research-based climate survey and present these data to district and school climate committees and the DEI task force. Survey data will enable the school climate committees to identify norms, establish benchmarks, and address strengths and weaknesses. The presentation of the climate survey data should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis where possible. So the things that we want to include from this other one are survey data. How do we want to combine this? We could just take this line here, that the survey include the greatest possible representative subgroups. And then what was it? I think it was it Chris? Did you suggest what was broken down in the policy?
The positive school climate policy.
That the survey include greatest possible representative subgroups. Yes, Beatrix?
I think when you're talking about the subgroups, rather than actually name them, because I agree with what Dr. McKinnon said, we don't want to leave anyone out. We don't want to box ourselves in. And this is the question I'm asking, and perhaps I'm just not saying it correctly, and so forgive me for that. But my understanding is the work of this task force will be filtered down to the school level climate committees. What I'm asking is, can we ensure that those include the subgroups that the climate committee has been tasked into? And maybe that's the wording that we use, but also not put us in a way where we're we're restricting it. Just make sure that it includes those communities that would be considered by that would, that fall under the guise of the DEI committee.
In the positive school, what is it? The positive school climate? What is the word I'm looking for? Positive school climate policy?
Safe school climate plan.
The Safe School Climate Plan has all of those subgroups broken down. So that's a policy that was just passed by all 3 boards of education. It was a plan approved by all 3 boards of education.
Oh, wait, I misspoke then. I'm sorry, Heather. I thought you were asking for the name of the plan that guides the district work. That's not the name of the policy.
Oh, wait,
It
which
is
one?
the Positive School Climate and Response to Bullying, 5131.911.
Do you have it up there? Can you
I do.
share what those subgroups are so that everyone knows what that is?
I can. Bear with me.
Do you want to share your screen?
Sure.
Wait, positive school climate, what is it?
It is the Positive School Climate and Response to Bullying. And the policy number is 5131.911.
5131.9 what?
911.
Okay. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Maybe put that in parentheses, that referencing the policy. And the only other thing I would add is survey data that will enable the school climate committees to identify norms, establish benchmarks, set goals, and address strengths and weaknesses.
So can everyone see this, what John is sharing here? Beatrix, do you see this, what he's sharing?
Yes.
So it's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, socioeconomic status, academic status, physical appearance, mental, physical, developmental, or sensory disability by association with an individual or group who has or is perceived to have one or more of such characteristics.
Okay, so that means then, I just want to make sure I understand this, that these areas that you've highlighted, that the climate studies that moving forward will include questions where the students are able to identify as those. I want to make sure that that's part of the normative data that we will be collecting moving forward.
And I think Dr. McKinnon, and maybe you can jump in. I think what you were suggesting before is if we say all of these must be present, there could be some that are not possible to include as a part of a normative. I maybe missed the point that you were making before.
Well, I think the point that you're making is a really powerful one, that differences include more than race, gender identity, expression, and so on. But I mean, look at those other examples: physical appearance, disability. I mean, they're really inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you refer to them as subgroups, and somehow you include a footnote or you put them in parentheses, and we're never going to find a research-based tool or survey looking at climate that includes all of those things.
So
But,
I would just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dr. McKinnon.
no, so sure, go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between asking a respondent to identify as one of those groups and asking questions that would help us to better understand the experiences of those represented by those groups. And that's an important distinction. So there are rules that govern what we can ask, especially about students with disabilities. And if you think about the age group that we survey, a student might not be aware of all of these groups, many of them, but perhaps not all. And something that we have seen on many of our surveys is the way that students treat one another with respect to physical appearance. And yet that's not a demographic category that we would be asking about. It doesn't mean it's not very important.
Right.
Okay, so is there a way to satisfy all of the concerns, make sure that we are including appropriate and necessary subgroups going forward on the climate surveys without running into this problem, which is if we say you have to list all of these things, then it's going to be possible to identify every single person who answers the survey, because we're getting down to this like microscopic level of identity.
So I think that was kind of the point earlier. If there's very specific things that we want that have to be asked. So we obviously, in the middle school survey last year, for some reason, there was no question about race, but we think that's an important subgroup. Then I think it should be identified in our recommendation. With also, we would like questions that ask about people's experiences in, like, we're not going to ask a question, I don't think, to fifth graders asking them about their socioeconomic status, right? So I want to be careful that we're getting really weeded into this recommendation. If there's a way to broaden the recommendation and then just identify the key elements or key subgroups that we want, and then again, including but not limited to these, and then allowing the central office to use their discretion on, especially because we also can't have a survey there has to be a length of survey that's appropriate for the age groups. And so you start to kind of have a survey that's so long that it also becomes not relevant.
I think that's what I was trying to say. Like, I think there should be some basics and leave room to add or take away certain things. Yeah. This is what I'm saying. Like, the fact that we did a middle school survey and left out race points to the fact that we need to at least have a few basics that we say, these will be standard. It doesn't have to be this huge list. But if we are moving the work of either we decide we're no longer in the DEI work business, or if we're moving it down to the climate committee level, then we at least need to have it be representative of what we would be looking at from a DEI perspective. And it doesn't have to include all these things. Leave room that and say and others or something along that line. I don't know if you guys can do that, but there's got to be about like 3 or 4 criteria that we know that we'll always be getting data on.
That's what I suggested before, Chris. I mean, I don't want to. We're on number 1, and it's an hour into the meeting, so I think that we can come to an agreement. And Chris, did you have?
I was going to suggest, to build on what Dr. McKinnon said earlier about having to get board approval for something anyway, to use broad language that suggests that we are recommending the administration identify and recommend to the boards a nationally normed climate instrument that incorporates questions that understand both the experience of different subgroups as well as allows for the identification of various subgroups. Basically put into the recommendation that the instrument should, as a bare minimum, look to identify and understand the experiences of as broad a number of subgroups as reasonably possible. And I think that 100% of those would include age and race as an absolute bare minimum. And I think beyond that will be gravy to a certain extent, depending on what the science supports.
Age, race, and gender.
Right. And then from there, we also include the other language about suggesting that the results of that be tabulated and interpreted by a third party who reports back. That other language is fine. But to get to the end of this, I think we just sort of broaden the ask as to what the administration is asked to go look for a national norm thing, which is going to come back anyway for further evaluation.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. So,
Heather,
yep.
one last question. Before we close out this meeting, is there a way that we can reconcile this with the preliminary recommendations that we all made? So we're all clear on any recommendations that have been made?
Yeah, they're
For the
also
full
listed
list?
in the minutes from that meeting.
I'm sorry?
They're also listed in the minutes from that meeting. They're listed. You can find them on the.
Right, I just think it would be good to have a comprehensive list of the recommendations that everyone can see before the end of the meeting.
Before the end of the meeting?
Or, yeah, if it's doable.
We can find, I'm sure we can find those other ones from before.
Might I suggest that at a future meeting that the District Climate Committee bring back a report to the DEI Task Force about the progress of most of the items on that list, since most of them were moved to the Climate Committee. I think one or two might have been moved to the Policy Committee. But that might be a useful report for the next meeting.
I think that all boards of education should also have these recommendations provided to them, all of them, the ones from before and these. So this says recommend that the district recommend. Oh God. To the boards a nationally recognized research-based climate survey, that the survey include the greatest possible representative subgroups, including age, race, gender identity, and present this data to district and school climate committees, the DEI task force. Survey data will enable the school climate committees to identify norms, establish benchmarks, set goals, and address strengths and weaknesses. The presentation of the climate survey data should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis where possible. Jennifer.
I'm sorry, just one more thing, maybe. So I like the including but not limited to wording.
Yeah, me too.
And I still like the cross-referencing to the policy that the three boards just approved. And then that with the including but not limited to. And then we're covered, and we'll have the normal approval process anyway.
So how do I write that though, without it being that massive group that's, you know what I mean?
So good question.
Recommend that the district consider the positive school climate and responsibility policy in recommending to the boards A.
Recommend that the district consider
the positive school climate and responsibility policy, parentheses, whatever it was, 5131.911.
responsibility, is it a policy?
Yes.
Yeah.
5131.911.
Yep.
In identifying and recommending to the boards a nationally.
Also our equity and inclusion statement.
You could do this too. Keep it the way it is, but that phrase, that add it to the end of the last sentence. So the presentation of the climate survey should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis, get rid of where possible, say in accordance with policy, blah, 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 and the DEI statement. And then we're done. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if you follow me.
Wordsmithing is the worst thing ever.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to move it along.
What I like about the way that Chris put it in putting it up there is that it sort of broadly applies to sort of the entire recommendation, is that we should be considering the positive school climate and responsible bullying policy. So sorry to add to the mess.
That's fine. I'm good either way.
So, but we can say that the analysis should be presented in accordance with the equity and inclusion statement. Do you see? So that what we're looking for aligns with our equity and inclusion statement. Recommend that the district consider the positive school climate and responsible bullying policy 5131.911 in identifying and recommending to the boards a nationally recognized research-based climate survey, that the survey include the greatest possible representative subgroups, including but not limited to age, race, gender identity, and present this data to the district and school climate committees and the DEI task force. Survey data will enable the school climate committees to identify norms, establish benchmarks, set goals, and address strengths and weaknesses. The presentation of the climate survey data should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis in accordance with the district equity and inclusion statement.
I'm wondering how the presentation of the data is in accordance with the DEI statement. I think we're trying to shoehorn here.
Okay, wait, okay, hold on. So the in accordance with the district equity and inclusion statement, that's the setting goals in accordance with the district. So this goes set goals, blink, right?
Sure. Okay.
Oh my gosh, now I've messed up. Okay, so establish benchmarks, set goals in accordance with the district equity and inclusion statement, and address strengths and weaknesses. The presentation of the climate survey data should present aggregate and subgroup data analysis to the greatest possible depth.
I like that turn of phrase.
Okay, is everybody good with that?
I don't have a hand raise thing. I've had my hand physically
sorry,
up. So when there's time and we're done wording this,
Yeah.
I've been trying to.
Sorry. Are we done with this number one? I just need people to say yes or no,
Yes.
because I don't have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
Beatrix, do you have your hand raised? Because.
Oh, yep, sorry.
Okay, so number two, Devin, you had one. Sorry
I
about
did,
that.
thank you.
It's
Oh,
a-
Jenny, you go ahead.
Jenny.
No, go on.
Okay, I was just gonna make a recommendation. We've talked about adjusting our calendar, which right now, the calendar we approved is to meet monthly. But to adjust the cadence of meetings to either bi-monthly, so every other month, or quarterly, to better, to allow the work of the district and school climate committees to have that, like, school climate committee reports their data or information to this DEI task force committee. So just to adjust the calendar, to meet less frequently, but to have, and also to be better connected to the school-based work.
Okay, recommend that the calendar be adjusted so the task force on DEI meets, and we can decide when that is, to allow school-based climate committees to, how did you put it?
To better align, or to better align, to allow the climate committees to do work within the school in some way. I don't have my brain is a little fried, sorry.
Yeah. So this would be, I would think, a discussion with the climate committees, right? To see how, Stephanie, can you talk to that?
About adjusting the frequency of the meetings?
Well, I mean, what would make sense if we're making recommendations to like the school climate committees are going to be getting a presentation on the survey data.
Yes.
The school climate committees need to have time to say, okay, let's do A, B, C, and D, and then meet back to with this group.
Yes, going back to the role of this group as one of oversight, there needs to be enough of an opportunity for action to be taken on the recommendations before coming back to report. So in general, I think that the recommendation makes good sense. And even in terms of the, sort of the follow-up with the next survey analysis, that would require a change in the next two meetings as well.
Okay, so recommend that the calendar be adjusted so the task force on DEI meets, what makes sense, bi-monthly? Every other month? quarterly. I don't
So
work
my
in
suggestion,
schools,
yeah, would
so-
be quarterly, and that like quarter 1 is about the goals for the year. Quarter 2 is budget driven, like what recommendations are we hearing from the climate committees in terms of budgets to make to our own boards. Quarter 3 would be about setup for the survey. Quarter 4 would be a review of survey data from the survey that was just like the end of year survey analysis from the third party or from the climate committees.
Okay, do we want to write that in this recommendation, Chris?
Yeah, can I suggest
No.
that questions about when this committee meets should not be a recommendation of this committee?
It's
We're
not.
charged with making recommendations as to DEI work. How we structure our internal discussions and
Okay.
when we meet is a topic for when we set our calendar for next year. I don't think we need to
Okay,
That's right.
dive into it. Although I agree with everything that's being said about how we should be thoughtful about that.
Right.
We're only making a recommendation to ourselves in this
right,
recommendation.
That's right.
got it.
Got it.
Okay, so next,
Skip to number 3.
Beatrix, you're muted.
Sorry, I had kids running into this room, so I do have a question, and forgive me, Stephanie, if you talked about it. I had to step away for like about 30 seconds, but are we now going to, are we going to be looking to centralize the actions of the various climate committees, or will they be operating independently of each other in terms of things as they happen? I don't know that I have a clear understanding of that. I know that like I'm on the one for John Reed, and we'll be addressing issues with John Reed. And I know that there's probably certain things, especially when it comes to the survey, that may or may not be specific to John Reed. But overall, one of the questions I have is, are we all going to be working on the same things? How is that going to be laid out?
Right. So at one of our earlier meetings, I think I presented a 3-year theory of action, sort of a larger goal for all 5 schools, for the 3 districts. And the district climate committee, which includes representatives from all 5 schools and central office, meets monthly to really to discuss sort of the intersection of the work that's going on in all of the schools. And one of the reasons why it's so important to meet together jointly is that we can have conversations about common themes, and that enables us to plan possibly district-wide professional learning opportunities, or make recommendations for budget proposals. In addition to that, each one of the schools will continue to hold their school climate committees that will include much more specific actions that are taken on the school level that are connected to the umbrella goals for the tri-district, but have actions that might be quite specific to a school. So for instance, if you're talking about engagement and positive climate in a building, it might be, we really want to look into creating this outdoor classroom area as a way of promoting student leadership. And that's really only relevant for that one building.
Okay, so we're getting off of the agenda now. So can we get back to any additional recommendations that we can make at this time?
Heather, when we met last and we did our preliminary recommendations, we left it at that simply because there were a lot of things that were pending the survey outcomes. And as we're still awaiting the cross tabs of those, it's kind of hard to come up with other recommendations without seeing those results.
Right. But there are things that we can recommend, such as what we've just spent an hour and 15 minutes on, number 1.
Right, I just need to go on record that these are not our final recommendations.
Correct. And also, I do believe that when that deeper analysis is done within the schools at the school climate committee level, each school is going to have different recommendations based on the findings of that school. You know, like Helen Keller.
So we're not going to get the other analysis from Ed Advance on these climate surveys? These will only go down to the climate committees of the schools?
No, but the climate committees at the school will also have that information. The climate
Hey,
committee.
Heather, I don't know if you can see, go ahead. Sorry, Jenny has her hand up. I don't know if you can see her because your screen is shared.
I just want to finish this thought. The school climate committee that you're on, Beatrix, you will get that analysis, and you will most likely, I would imagine, be able to say, oh wow, here's how the students at John Reed answered these questions, which that's more important for John Reed to take actionable steps on than John Reed to say, well, here's what the students at Samuel Staples said.
Okay, so then we as a DEI committee won't be making those final recommendations based on those numbers now.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm not writing the agenda for the next meeting. So I would assume that could be on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jenny.
I think my first comment is, again, and Heather, I have a lot I want to say. I don't know if it's specific to the recommendations. I am having trouble with the process of making these recommendations, period. And maybe it's Dr. McKinnon to speak to it, or Dr. Pearson-Ugal. It seems very backwards to me. I feel like we're telling central office what to do. People who are professionals, who are trained, who are as involved and deeply working with the state policies and procedures as we are exposed to them as board members, and far more so. And that as they come together and do this work, I feel like the recommendations should be coming from them to us. And then we discuss as boards and bring them back to our respective boards. It's right. I think I'm just uncomfortable with the whole, I understand the passion and the concern behind wanting to make sure that certain things are done, but the process feels backwards to me.
I hear you. I think that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is providing oversight and accountability, and trying to make sure that some mistakes that have been made in the past are not made in the future. So
at what point is that? And I think this is why I mentioned the last time that I think the charge needs to be revisited. I'm glad to hear that the calendar is being, that we're internally going to be discussing changing the calendar, but I think the charge needs to be looked at.
I would agree. I mean, when we wrote that charge, we had not engaged in this work at all. So I think 100% I agree with you. But for now, we have an agenda, and the agenda says that we're supposed to be making whatever recommendations that people have right now. We, based on the information that we've received, what recommendations does this group of people, because there are some people who aren't going to be here going forward, what recommendations do these people want to see carried forward? Cheryl.
Just a reminder for, as memorialized in the minutes that this task force approved, we did come up with a list of recommendations that are in the minutes during our meeting on August 4th. So perhaps to facilitate and this meeting and move it along, maybe we can bring those up if people would like. Just a suggestion. Yep. And it's still under the guise of the specific agenda item, which is to come up with recommendations.
I would also say, just on based on experience in various other committees, incorporating the input of central office personnel, building administrators, et cetera, is a crucial part of the process, because you're going to get the recommendations wrong if you're not bringing in their input. And we've heard a little bit of that tonight. And Jenny, I think, hearing more of that as a part of this conversation, I agree. It's very helpful when Dr. McKinnon and Dr. Pearson-Ugal jump in and help us. And we want to make sure that we're inviting them into that conversation and that they feel, sort of ready to jump in.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, that building people who work in the buildings and people who work in central office are part of this group who are helping craft this in a way that makes sense legally and in terms of what's needed and necessary at the schools. I'm trying to find those minutes.
Heather, I
I
sent you
feel
an
like we're
email
making
with the
extra work for
link
them.
and the recommendations that were in that link.
Thank
So you
you.
could just, all you need to do is just pull it up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And while we're waiting for that, I'd be curious for the task force members who haven't spoken, I'm curious about where your thoughts are.
Agreed.
I could, I don't know if anybody has their hand. Oh, Beatrix, your hand raised?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Down.
From our last analysis with Ed Advance, one of the things that was mentioned was there was a theme of bullying and safety issued around issues around gender and sexual orientation. So one of my recommendations is to have ongoing PD on gender and LGBTQ inclusive training district-wide.
And for the boards as well.
That would, I think so.
On what, on gender?
Yes, and LGBTQ plus inclusivity.
I would like that to include, so is this, okay, I would like that to include somehow coaches.
Yeah, so that was one of the other things I was going to mention. Not coaches necessarily, but people, guest speakers, professionals with diverse backgrounds and expertise to be offered for, well, I was thinking parents and families, but also I think all faculty, Board of Education. The more education, the better, and opportunity to ask questions.
So how do I write this? Recommend that the district provide ongoing professional development on LGBTQIA plus inclusivity in all schools for boards. And am I capturing this? Here's.
Yes, on the PD part, yes.
I think it's recommendation number the first one from the minutes. Is that?
Recommend
that capture what?
Here it is. Recommend that the Joint Policy Committee review existing policies related. Wait, hold on. No, this is in the, we already have this one. The boards of education include funding for professional development for LGBTQ plus and marginalized communities. The assistant superintendent consider the need for that professional development for administrators, faculty, and support staff, including front office support staff, and for themselves.
Yeah.
So we've got this one. So this I will include, like in the minutes, I will include these in the minutes with this meeting because they were brought up on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just make sure that the recommendation includes boards of education? Like it's not in that one, so just add that piece.
Okay, so I can say that the previous, we can change this.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh no, now what's happened? Does that catch it? And then I can.
Yep, that's fine.
And then I can put this here in parentheses. Okay. Okay. So is that good, Susan? Does that? So I've put in the parentheses, that maybe the parentheses is confusing because there's other parentheses in here. So I can put this in italics.
Yep, that looks good.
Okay. Is there a number 3?
Well, as we mentioned, like having information sessions, guest speakers, kind of an ongoing basis. I don't know how we would do it. I feel like it should be for community, parents, staff. It's kind of for everybody. So I don't know if it'd be separate or combined.
So we could say including boards of education and community members. Does that capture what you were?
I'm not really looking at it as PD. It's more just for the
Have
opportunity.
educational opportunities.
Right, educational, yeah, educational guest speakers,
Okay.
open discussions.
So include educational opportunities for boards of education and community members.
Mhm. Like as a parent, I would love, you know, ongoing series where, on various different things, on how to, you know, work with my child, to talk about X, Y, and Z. So I don't know, something along that lines could be incorporated.
I'll say families. So educational opportunities for boards of education, family, and community members.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there a third? Anyone?
So this is specific to the middle school. So I don't know if that's something that we're doing, if we're going that specific. Just from what we heard from Ed Advance, the concern for bullying increasing in middle school, according to the middle schoolers, specific to sexual orientation and gender. I know we have a GSA in our high school. I don't know if it's something that we could provide an opportunity for students to start in the middle school.
John Reed has one.
Oh, they do. Okay. So I don't think Helen Keller does.
I think, I don't know that that is a recommendation of the task force. It was students that went to the administration.
Okay.
And there was a teacher who had, you know, volunteered to supervise that years ago and was just waiting for the kids to say they wanted it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I know it's student led. I didn't know. Okay.
I don't think the task force can recommend that students start something.
Gotcha. Well, not start it, but I'm saying,
Yeah. But
we
I
would
hope
provide that space. You know what I mean? Like if it were something that they were interested in.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's the task force that would do that, that would make that recommendation.
Gotcha.
I mean, someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Am I? I'm often wrong. Okay. Is there a number 3? Nope. Okay, so we have 2 recommendations here, and they're pretty. One of them is very, very budget policy related, and then moving on, public comment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Any members of the public wishing to make a comment, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. I see
Nope, there's one, Maureen.
Maureen. Can you state your name and your street and town, please?
Yes, Maureen Hanley, 21 Andrews Road. Tried to turn on my video, but I guess it's not enabled. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. First, Dr. McKinnon, welcome. I'm Maureen Hanley. I'm one of the members of Save Our Schools, Save Our Towns. We've been closely watching the developments in our town for a very long time, especially in regards to this survey. Just a couple of questions I'd like to put out there. First of all, I was very impressed with Dr. Glass's presentation at the last DEI meeting. And, I got a couple of questions in regards to the further analysis, what that cost might be to taxpayers, if there is any. And, I wonder how much of this is the disappointment of the DEI task force of the lack of engagement in the survey itself. Then, a very important question that I have was a comment that was made earlier that going forward that the climate survey would have certain DEI survey questions folded into the future of the climate survey. Then I heard some members disagree about whether race and gender. Some said that that was already existing, but then someone came back and said race wasn't, and that identity would be new. So I would love to hear some clarification as to where your task force thinks the climate survey is going in the future. I would probably just say in closing, following on another comment that was made, that if 98% of our kids are happy, that we could still have a problem. I just might be old here. My oldest daughter is probably older than more of the people on this task force. And I'm a proud grandmother, but I still have one at HKMS. So I sit here and I ask myself, where is the greater good? If we do have 98% of our kids that are happy, and if there is a problem, and if it's a systemic problem, I want to know about it and I want it addressed. But I see this as digging in to something to just, feed something that has no fire. And I think we've seen from our town that it has no fire. And that's really, and thank you for listening to me. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Dana Benson.
Hi, Dana Benson, Pond Road, Easton. I guess I was a little surprised. I probably should have known this, that we have, I know we had the school level climate committees, and I know we had the monthly, I guess I didn't realize we had the monthly district climate committee. And I guess my question is, at some point, do we need the ER9 committee in addition? Why can't the monthly district committee handle the oversight, or why can't the Board of Ed itself handle the oversight? Why do we need this massive committee? It seems like there's quite a few committees, and that's my only comment. Thank you.
If you could tell me your address, please.
Yes, it's hi, it's Debbie Bearer, 8 Hayes Street in Easton. Thank you. I'm reading from prepared remarks. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And thank you, ER9 DEI Task Force, for working towards what I believe is an undisputable goal for all of us, helping our students to achieve their full potential. This can be achieved in the safe, welcoming environment that you, the ER9 DEI Task Force, is dedicated to building. Your well thought out comprehensive climate survey will be an invaluable tool to this end and will help us find out what percentage of our students are happy, because how do we know? The students of today are the leaders of tomorrow, and it is our obligation as adults to give them all the support they need and deserve. DEI work discovers what exactly is the support each student needs, and people who strive for a better future must support DEI work. As has been expressed before, this past election was a win for truth, transparency, and forward-thinking, actionable ideas. Division, fear, and misinformation lost. Productive discussion is welcome, but disruption and delay towards our goals is not, or are not. If people are concerned by the direction in which our schools and town are headed, they are welcome to run for the town positions that would allow them to work openly to achieve these common goals. Now, with experienced town voices back in place, plus new people and perspectives, our town can become the Easton we all imagine. It starts with supporting our precious students, for they will be building the Easton of the future. Thank you again, ER9 DEI Task Force.
Thank you, Debbie. Can I get your road again, please?
Sure, it's Hayes Street in Easton.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Agnes.
I just wanted to thank the task force for all their work to improve our schools and ensure they're safe for everyone. Making sure students feel safe allows them to succeed academically, and it's a job of the school to do this work. So thank you. Agnes Bebon, Black Rock Turnpike, Easton.
Thank you. Okay. Dana Benson, did you have another comment? Or did you not put your hand down? Okay. Is there any committee member comment? Oh,
I had a quick additional comment, if that's acceptable.
sure.
Characterizing people who question some of the approaches and who questioned some of the questions on the survey, characterizing them as spreading misinformation, as being ignorant, as being less progressive, as being political, as being divisive, is not constructive in my point of view. And I just want to point out that anything that's been done by my group or our group has been done in reaction to actions taken by this group, this committee, and by those in the educational establishment. We are defensive in our nature, and we are only reacting to what you're doing. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Okay, so let's go through. Seeing none, committee member comment. Any committee, Devin?
So this is, I think, our last meeting with folks who are leaving our boards. There are a few of you. I'm going to miss them. John, I know. Heather, I think that's maybe, if I'm missing somebody, I'm sorry. But I just want to say thank you to both of you for not only serving on this task force, but serving on your local board, and for bringing so much experience, expertise, passion to your work. You will be missed. I'm sure you won't stay far away, but just want to say thank you for your work. And Heather, I know this task force was something that you brought to the boards of education to form based on feedback from our students that they were experiencing things in school that made them feel unsafe. And so you made sure that those voices were heard. And I think that is the mission of our boards, and the mission of our schools is to make sure that every one of our kids has a safe experience where they're seen, where they're heard, and where they can get the academic experience that allows them to achieve not only in school when they're with us, but when they're beyond our walls in college and then beyond. So I just want to say thank you for doing this important work, and wish you both well.
Thank you. John Riley.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Devin. As many know, we started this task force 18 months ago. There was nothing political about it. It's really to help marginalized students, as Devin said, feel safe in their school, and to create a better learning environment. This is a new task force. This is happening in corporations and boardrooms throughout the country. They recognize, as we do, that we're better through diversity, we're better through equity, we're better through inclusion. I too want to thank Heather for her tremendous work in literally holding this group together over the last 18 months. Progress always wins, and we're going to do well for our students, and I look forward to this work continuing in the years to come.
Thank you, John. Any additional, my internet connection is unstable, by the way. Any additional committee member comment? Jenny.
Thanks, Heather. I just wanted to say the same, basically to thank you for taking on this task. I haven't been a part of the group for very long, but I know it's been an extremely challenging experience, especially I think for you personally, kind of leading the work, both on the committee and outside of it. And I'm just sort of apologizing in general. I still feel badly that you ever felt like this was sort of in vain or were under attack in any way, shape, or form by members of the community. So thank you for sticking it out with us and kind of leaving your legacy of doing this for the students behind with us. To the board and the committee in general, moving forward, I think we have some work to do in terms of how we conduct ourselves in the public, on social media and in our interactions in the community. I think there are still some folks who are feeling that if you don't have the right opinion, that you're not necessarily welcome at the table. And I can tell you that I am uncomfortable being a part of a committee where members of that committee have taken my words from meetings and used them in a very personally damaging way. So to the extent that there is a look, sort of an inward look at policy and bylaw, just as we finished a review on the Easton board, I think that also needs to trickle down into our committee work. And while we can't necessarily hold individuals, students, adults that join us in the community in these groups accountable to our specific bylaws as boards, I think maybe it's worth having a discussion just sort of in a general conduct manner that we talk about what is positive, what's going to move us forward, what's going to be supportive of everyone who's participating in the work that we're trying to do. That's it. I'm sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
Thank you.
It made sense.
Any additional committee member comment? I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating. This was, it was a challenge. It was never in vain. I never ever felt that this was in vain. I am not afraid of a challenge, and I do want to say that if 98% of our kids say that they're happy, that's awesome, but we got to figure out why that 2% is not. We cannot, especially in a group that a community that is lacking in diversity, say that the 2% doesn't matter. The 2% matters a lot. So thank you again. If anyone in Reading is looking to step down, I'm happy to take your place as a community member. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Devin?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Riley. All right, meeting is adjourned at 8:44 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.